My parents bought my sister a house, then handed me the loan papers and said, "Family means sacrifice." I said no. They sued me for $450,000. But in court, the judge looked at them and asked one thing that made their lawyer go silent. I, 32M, thought I understood what family meant. Loyalty, support, sacrifice when necessary. But there's a difference between sacrifice and being financially gutted by people who share your DNA. It started 3 months ago when my parents invited me to dinner. Not unusual. We did this every few weeks, a tradition they insisted on maintaining even after I moved 2 hours away for work. I drove down that Sunday expecting roast chicken and small talk about their garden. What I got instead was a folder pushed across the table before dessert. My father slid it toward me while my mother watched with this expectant smile that made my stomach turn. I opened it. Loan documents. My name typed neatly on signature lines. Amount, $450,000. I asked what this was. My father explained that they'd helped my sister buy a house. A beautiful property in a neighborhood she'd always dreamed of living in. For bedrooms, renovated kitchen, the works. The thing was, they'd used their retirement savings as collateral and taken out a loan to cover the down payment and closing costs. Now they needed someone to take over the payments. That someone was me. I stared at the papers. My sister was 35, 3 years older than me, married with 2 kids. Her husband worked in sales. She'd been a stay-at-home mom for the past 6 years. They weren't struggling exactly, just not in a position to afford a house that cost nearly $1 million in our expensive market. I asked why they didn't discuss this with me first. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. She said family means sacrifice. She said I was doing well in my career, making good money as a software engineer, no kids to worry about. She said my sister needed this. Her kids deserved to grow up in a safe neighborhood with good schools. I pulled my hand back. I asked if my sister knew about this arrangement. My father said she did. She was grateful. She knew I'd understand. But I didn't understand. I'd spent the last 8 years building my career from nothing. I'd worked 2 jobs through college, graduated with minimal debt because I'd been smart and careful. I'd saved aggressively, invested wisely. I was planning to buy my own place next year. And now they wanted me to take on a monthly payment of nearly $3,000 for a house I'd never live in. I told them no. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. My mother's face crumpled. She asked how I could be so selfish. My father leaned back in his chair with this look of profound disappointment. He said they'd raised me better than this. He said when he was my age, he would have done anything for his family. I stood up. I said I loved them, but this wasn't fair. This was their decision, not mine. If they wanted to help my sister, that was generous, but they couldn't make me responsible for their generosity. I left the folder on the table and walked out. For 2 weeks, they called every day. My mother cried on voicemail. My father sent texts about duty and responsibility. My sister finally called, her voice tight and angry. She said I was ruining her life. Her kids were excited about the new house. They'd already enrolled them in the local school. How could I do this to them? I tried to explain that I wasn't doing anything to them. I just wasn't willing to derail my own financial future for a decision I'd had no part in making. She called me selfish and hung up. Then the call stopped. I thought maybe they'd accepted my decision. Maybe they'd found another solution. I was wrong. The lawsuit arrived 4 weeks after that dinner. My parents were suing me for breach of verbal contract and promissory estoppel. They claimed I'd verbally agreed to take on the loan during previous family discussions. They had my sister as a witness. They were demanding I either sign the loan documents or pay them $450,000 in damages for the financial distress my refusal had caused. I sat in my apartment staring at the legal papers, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. My own parents, suing me. I called my friend who worked as a paralegal. He recommended a lawyer who specialized in family disputes. Her name was Ruth, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. I met her 2 days later and laid everything out. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she asked if there was any truth to their claim about verbal agreements. I said absolutely not. We'd never discussed me taking on any loan. I'd never agreed to anything. The first I'd heard about any of this was when they handed me those papers at dinner. Ruth asked if I had any proof of that. I thought about it. Then I remembered something. My parents had a habit of recording family dinners on their tablet. My mother liked capturing moments, she said. Memories for when they got older. I'd found it annoying but harmless. I asked Ruth if that could help. She said if those recordings existed and showed no prior discussion of this arrangement, they could be crucial. But getting them might be difficult. That night, I called my younger cousin. She was 24, worked as a graphic designer, and had always been closer to me than my sister. I asked if she'd heard anything about the lawsuit. She said yes, the whole family was talking about it. Most of them thought I was being unreasonable. I explained my side. She listened quietly. Then she said something interesting. She'd been at my parents' house the week before and saw my mother watching old videos on her tablet. The tablet was usually left in the kitchen, charging on the counter. I asked if she could help me. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she'd think about it. 3 days later, a USB drive arrived in my mail. No return address. Just a small note in my cousin's handwriting. Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Christmas last year. Easter this year. Nothing there. I plugged it in. She'd copied 3 family gathering videos. I watched all of them. Hours of footage. My parents chatting with relatives. My sister's kids running around. Normal family stuff. And nowhere, in any of those videos, was there any mention of loans, houses, or me taking on financial responsibility for anything. But there was something else. In the Thanksgiving video, I caught a conversation between my parents and my sister in the kitchen. They thought they were alone, but the tablet was on the counter, still recording. My mother was talking about how they could convince me to help with the house. My father said I had the money, I just needed the right motivation. My sister suggested they present it as a done deal, make it seem like I was breaking a promise if I refused. They'd planned this. All of it. I sent the files to Ruth. She called me an hour later. Her voice had a sharp edge of satisfaction. She said this changed everything. This was evidence of fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. We weren't just defending against their lawsuit anymore. We could go on the offensive. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Ruth filed a countersuit for attempted fraud, emotional distress, and legal fees. My parents' lawyer tried to get it dismissed. The judge denied the motion and scheduled a full hearing to address both the original suit and the countersuit together. Those 6 weeks were brutal. My extended family divided into camps. Most sided with my parents and sister. I was the villain in their story, the selfish son who had everything and wouldn't help when his family needed him. A few people reached out quietly to say they understood my position, but they couldn't say so publicly. My cousin stopped responding to my messages. I think the family figured out she'd help me. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept thinking about sitting across from my parents in a courtroom, about how we'd gotten here, about whether there was any coming back from this. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, that particular smell of old paper and cleaning products. My parents sat with their lawyer on one side. My sister was there too, in the gallery, glaring at me. I sat with Ruth on the other side, trying to keep my hands from shaking. The judge was a black woman in her 60s, Judge Patterson according to the nameplate. She had reading glasses perched on her nose and a no-nonsense expression that made me sit up straighter. She reviewed the case file for what felt like an eternity. Then she looked up at my parents' lawyer and asked him to present his opening argument. He stood and launched into his prepared statement. He talked about family obligations and verbal agreements. He said I'd been discussing this loan for months, that my parents had relied on my assurances when they co-signed for my sister's house. He painted me as someone who'd backed out at the last minute, leaving my elderly parents in financial ruin. It was a good performance. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it. Judge Patterson listened without expression. When he finished, she turned to Ruth. Ruth stood and calmly explained that there was no verbal agreement. She said my parents had, in fact, deliberately deceived me and were now attempting to use the legal system to force me into financial responsibility for a decision I'd never agreed to. She said we had video evidence proving this was a coordinated plan to manipulate me. The judge's eyebrows rose. She asked to see the evidence. Ruth played the relevant section of the Thanksgiving video on a laptop connected to the courtroom screen. The audio was clear enough. My parents and sister discussing their strategy. My mother's voice saying I was too proud to refuse if they made it seem like I'd already agreed. My sister laughing and saying I'd probably guilt myself into it anyway. The courtroom went dead silent. I watched my parents' faces drain of color. My sister had gone pale in her seat. Their lawyer was gripping his pen so hard his knuckles were white. Judge Patterson watched the whole clip. Then she asked to see it again. We played it twice more. She made notes. Then she looked at my parents' lawyer and asked if he had any response to this evidence. He stammered something about context and misunderstanding. Judge Patterson cut him off. She asked him directly whether he'd been aware of this video before filing the lawsuit. He said no. He'd relied on his client's representations. Judge Patterson turned to my parents. Her voice was sharp. She asked them if they understood that what they'd done could be considered fraud, that attempting to use false testimony to extract money from their son wasn't just morally wrong, but potentially criminal. My mother started crying. My father tried to speak, but the judge raised her hand. Then she asked the question that Ruth later told me was the turning point. She looked directly at my parents and asked, "Did you consult your son before purchasing this house for your daughter?" Simple question. Devastating in its simplicity. My father hesitated. Then he admitted that no, they hadn't consulted me. They'd made the decision themselves. Judge Patterson leaned back. She asked why. If they'd made this decision independently, they believed their son should be legally obligated to pay for it. My father had no answer. Neither did their lawyer. The judge spent another 10 minutes asking pointed questions about the loan structure, about whether I'd signed anything, about what specific promises I'd allegedly made. Each answer from my parents' side dug them deeper. Their lawyer kept trying to reframe, but there was no recovering from that video. Finally, Judge Patterson made her ruling. She dismissed my parents' lawsuit with prejudice, meaning they couldn't refile it. She found in favor of my countersuit, ordering them to pay my legal fees and awarding me $15,000 for emotional distress. She stopped short of referring them for criminal prosecution, but she made it clear that she considered their actions reprehensible and that they were fortunate she was being lenient. The gavel came down. My parents sat frozen. My sister had her face in her hands. Their lawyer was already packing his briefcase, clearly done with this case. Ruth touched my arm and said we should go. We walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Update 1. The aftermath was complicated. News of the ruling spread through the family within hours. The narrative shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't the selfish one anymore. Questions started being asked about what my parents had been thinking, about whether they'd manipulated other people in similar ways. My sister called me the next day. Her voice was flat, exhausted. She said they were going to lose the house. The bank was already calling about missed payments. My parents couldn't afford it on their own, and she and her husband couldn't qualify for a loan large enough to refinance. I asked if she was calling to blame me. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said no. She said she'd been so caught up in wanting that house, in wanting to give her kids everything, that she'd let our parents convince her this was okay. She said she was sorry. I told her I appreciated that, but sorry didn't fix what they'd done. She agreed. She said they were listing the house next week. They'd probably lose money on the sale. Her kids were devastated. I felt bad about that. The kids hadn't done anything wrong, but I also knew that wasn't my responsibility. Their parents had made choices that led here. Not me. My parents didn't call. I heard through other relatives that they were furious, convinced the judge had been biased, that Ruth had manipulated the case. They were telling anyone who'd listen that I destroyed the family over money. Some people believed them. Most didn't. The video had leaked somehow. I suspected my cousin or maybe one of the other relatives who'd been in the courtroom. Once people saw it, heard my parents planning to manipulate me, the last of their support evaporated. My cousin finally messaged me 2 weeks after the hearing. She apologized for going silent. She said the family had been pressuring her, trying to figure out if she'd helped me. She denied it, but things had been tense. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was. I thanked her for what she'd done. She sent back a heart emoji and said family should mean support, not exploitation. Update 2. 3 months after the court case, things had settled into a new normal. My sister sold the house. They took a loss, but managed to find a decent rental in a good school district. Her husband picked up extra work. She got a part-time job. They were adjusting. My parents, on the other hand, spiraled. The legal fees from their failed lawsuit had depleted their savings further. They'd borrowed from the retirement fund to help with my sister's down payment, and now they were looking at a significantly reduced retirement. My father tried to go back to work part-time, but he was 71 and the options were limited. They reached out through my aunt, asking if we could talk. I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our homes. They looked older. My mother's hair had gone completely white. My father's hands shook when he lifted his coffee cup. They apologized, said they'd been wrong. said they'd let their desire to help my sister cloud their judgment. My mother cried again, saying she didn't know how they'd gotten here, how a family could fall apart like this. I told them I appreciated the apology, but things couldn't just go back to normal. Trust wasn't rebuilt with words. They'd taken me to court. They'd tried to ruin me financially. They'd planned and schemed and lied. My father asked what I wanted from them. I thought about it. Then I told them the truth. I didn't know if I wanted anything from them anymore. Maybe with time, we could rebuild something. But right now, I needed distance. They accepted that. We finished our coffee in uncomfortable silence and went our separate ways. Update 3. It's been 9 months since the lawsuit. I bought my condo last month. 2-bedroom, great location, well within my budget since I hadn't taken on a massive loan for someone else's house. I'm furnishing it slowly, enjoying the process of making it mine. My sister and I text occasionally. Surface level stuff. How are you? How are the kids? Did you see that funny video? We're not close, but we're not enemies. She invited me to her daughter's birthday party next month. I haven't decided if I'll go. My parents and I speak maybe once a month. Brief calls. They tell me about their garden. I tell them about work. We don't talk about the lawsuit. We don't talk about the house. We don't talk about any of it. Maybe someday we will. Maybe we won't. The legal fees were covered by the judgment against them, but Ruth billed fairly, and I ended up with most of that $15,000 after everything was settled. I put it toward my condo down payment. Seemed fitting somehow. Some relatives have reached out to say I did the right thing. Others still think I'm cold for not just helping when I had the means. I've stopped caring what they think. I learned something important through all of this. Having the means to help doesn't create an obligation to help, especially when helping means sacrificing your own future. My younger cousin and I got lunch last week. She's doing well, picked up some new clients for her design work. We didn't talk about the lawsuit or the video she'd sent me. We just caught up like normal people. As we were leaving, she said something that stuck with me. You taught me it's okay to set boundaries. Even with family. Especially with family. I think about that a lot. About boundaries. About what we owe each other as family members. About the difference between sacrifice and self-destruction. My parents thought family meant I should sacrifice my financial security for my sister's dream house. But family should never mean destroying yourself to prop someone else up, especially when they have other options. Real family, healthy family, wants you to thrive, not just survive. I don't regret saying no. I don't regret fighting back when they tried to force me. And I don't regret the distance I've maintained since. Maybe that makes me cold. Maybe it makes me selfish. Or maybe it just makes me someone who finally understood that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just exploitation with a prettier name. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with my choices. And I'm okay with the life I'm building on my own terms. That's enough. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe and hype button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe and press the hype button. Thanks in advance.